Good morning, Imagine Church. It is good to be able to be with you this Sunday, and I've shared this with you before and will say it again, just how proud Kevin and I are of all of you to intentionally create time on your Sunday morning and to be together right now, whether it's listening or whether it's chatting in the little chat thread that's available online right now. It's a gift to be able to know that we're all together right now, even as we are socially distancing ourselves from each other. And we look forward to the time where we're able to, reunite and be together again. And we're proud of the ways that this community, all of you, have been navigating through this season, navigating through conversations, navigating through issues dealing with racism, whether these are things that are a familiarity or not to you. Just your courageous, bold ways of being open, of speaking, and of moving into action, embodying this presence of justice and love. And more than ever, we believe in the importance of unity. And that's why Kevin and I are so proud that we can continue to engage in these conversations, that we can continue to engage in grace and in love. And, for Kevin and I, we believe in the importance of incarnational love, which means putting flesh on the divine, essentially speaking. It's what does it look like to bear good news? What does it look like to bear justice out there in the world with our bodies, with our mouth, with what we say, in how we're still and how we listened, and with the creative tools that we have within ourselves and within our imagination. And with seeing people, boldly and bravely be part of these protests or these paddle outs. One of the other things that has really stood out to me is also seeing people in our church live out the good news, even by being of service to one another. Halenani is a nursing rehabilitation center that Imagine used to always regularly throw bingo nights to our friends over there. And with COVID-19, with the shutdown, shelter in place, we haven't been able to be out there. But the other day, a handful of people came together in our church and put goodie bags together, and were able to, drop those off at Halenani to our friends, reminding them that, hey, we haven't forgotten you, we still see you, we still remember you, and we still celebrate you. And then to find out that, people in a living rooms is our version of a small groups. They got together and were part of a food distribution center here in the neighborhood. Again, being the hands and feet of Jesus, bearing good news and making this corner of the universe we live in more beautiful and more kind and more loving through our actions and through our presence. And so that's been really, really neat and really beautiful to see how our church is being the church outside of a building or outside of a small group, and moving into the neighborhood, moving into the community through our actions and through our love. And so we just wanted to say that we are so proud of you. We just wanted to share some of these beautiful things that have been happening and emerging within our community. Even there are people in our living rooms also in our church who are, already early on proactively raising awareness in, the political election that's coming up, and raising awareness of voters' rights and whatnot. And so, bearing good news and being a voice piece of justice and of love during a time like this, to stand up against racism, to stand for unity, not divisiveness, is more crucial in a time like this more than ever. And so we are just so grateful for you, Imagine Church, and we are just so proud of you for the way that you are loving and the way that you are living and leading.
not strong, then I'll be your friend. I'll help you carry on, for it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on. You just a call on me, brother, when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. Said I just might have a problem that you understand. We all need somebody to lean on me. When you're not strong, and I'll be your friend. So I'll help you carry on, for well, it won't be long till I'm gonna need somebody to lean on.
Aloha, Halinani.
Hey guys.
Jen and Oliver from Imagine Bingo Nights. We're thinking of you. We miss you. We wish we could be there playing bingo with you guys. We hope that you're happy and safe. And we want to send you lots of love.
Just want to let you guys know that God's watching over you guys, and we miss you guys a lot. And yeah, we just wish we were there with you guys and there for our bingo night. So hopefully we'll see you guys a lot sooner than later.
Yeah.
So we send you guys big hugs. We love you guys, and aloha. Bye.
Hi Halinani, it's Jess. I just wanted to say hi and let you know that I'm thinking about you and praying for you guys. I hope everything's okay over there. I know things are different right now, but hang in there, and yeah, I just wanted to send my love and my prayers there for you guys, and let you know that we miss you guys so much, and we think about you all the time, and we can't wait until we get to be there and play bingo with you again and catch up on life. We love you, we miss you, and we'll see you later.
Last night I dreamt I was returning, and my heart called out to you, but I fear I am not. Aloha, miss you. I hope you guys are doing all right. And we got the film at the beach, like the poolside. You guys can enjoy that, and we hope you guys are all doing well. We miss you, and we look forward to the day when we can see each other again. But in the meantime, you're in our prayers. Just remember that we love you. So, yeah, I really miss being there for bingo with you guys. Just like the Thursdays, I really look forward to going there and hanging out with you. Even though it's for a really short time, it really meant a lot to us. Back then, I remember when a kid there last time we were there. And I remember Donna and
Take me back to the garden. Lead me back to the moment I heard your voice. Take me back to communion. Lead me back to the moment I saw your face. And it was all so simple. You're so easy to love. And no space between us. You're so easy to trust. 'Cause you are closer, closer than my skin. And you are in the air I'm breathing. Here's where the dead things come back to living. I feel my heart beating again. And it feels so good to know you are my friend. This is the garden. Here in the place that finds you close. This is communion. Here in the place I'm fully known. And it was all so simple. You're so easy to love. No space between us. You're so easy to trust. 'Cause you are closer, closer than my skin. And you are in the air I'm breathing. Here's where the dead things come back to living. I feel my heart beating again. And it feels so good to know you are my friend. This is where we're meant to be. Me and you and you and me. I don't have to prove a thing. You've already approved of me. This is where I'm meant to be. Me and you and me. And I don't have to prove a thing. You've already approved of me. You are closer, closer than my skin. You are in the air I'm breathing. Here's where the dead things come back to living. I feel my heart beating again. And it feels so good to know you are my friend. And it feels so good to know you are my friend. And it feels so good to know you are my friend.
During this time of worship, I wanted to take a moment to pause for a second, to help people make sense of what's happening, to help people have further clarity on how we as pastors and as leaders in this church are choosing to engage in this critical cultural moment. You know, the murder of George Floyd became the catalyst for this movement of demonstrations, of public visibility, and of people rising up and trying to hold the powers that be accountable, all for the sake of longing for and for the sake of creating a more human, a more whole, a more just world that allows everybody to flourish in the same way. And so we saw this as a moment to commit to be a part of that change, to move in and to make things visible, to publicly demonstrate, to make sure the names of the victims are being said, to march with people in the streets. So we've been very intentional about what's happening right now and how us as the church can bear witness to the injustice in light of the coming kingdom of God that flows in and through Christ. So for those of you who have felt that, have been a part of that, or have been at least humble enough to listen to all of that, we're so grateful. But also what I want people to understand is we don't just want to move in to help change the moment, but we want this moment to change us as a church. We don't want us to just move in for this specific form of justice as we desire a more whole, a more flourishing future for the Black community in the U.S., although we clearly do want that and see that as critical towards America's future. But we also want this moment with George Floyd, with this moment for the demonstrations, to really do work in us as a church, so we continue to have the eyes to see the injustice here in Hawaii. So we want this moment to change us to move differently into the future. We want this moment to radicalize us and allow us to go deeper into the heart of God for justice, so we can continue to sustain that energy, that movemental energy, to continue to commit to bear witness to the injustice that happens here in Hawaii, so we can align ourselves with people who are working for justice, working for liberation, working for the further flourishing of Native Hawaiian people and anybody else who is being marginalized or oppressed here at all. So let's commit together as we worship and as we move forward as a church, not just to commit to commit to work for change in the moment, but to allow this moment to change us for a different kind of movement for the rest of our lives.
Spiritual malnutrition is much more pervasive. And by spiritual malnutrition, I'm not just talking about emptiness of soul, but I'm talking about an indifference to the suffering of others, a callousness to those who are catching hell. Great Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel used to say, indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. Well, William James, probably the greatest and most lovable and adorable of all public intellectuals in America in the last 200 years, he said, indifference is the one trait that makes the very angels weep. It's the very opposite of what it is to follow the way of the cross as opposed to the dominant ways of the world.
I'm convinced that a lot of young people aren't leaving the church because we've made the gospel too hard, but because we've made it too easy. And we've just thought, oh, young people, they want to be entertained. You know, we need louder worship music, or we need blow-up sumo dolls or whatever, you know, and like, that's fun for a little while. You know, it's a great youth night or whatever, but they might come to that, but they're not going to stay because of that. They're going to stay because we've given them a vision for God's kingdom coming on earth. We've challenged them to dive into the trenches of the deep darkness of our world and to like get into places where people have been forsaken. A whole generation is very aware that the world we've been handed is fragile, and And if we continue to just, promise people life after death, I think we will lose a generation that is excited about the afterlife, but they're also just as concerned about tomorrow and what the gospel has to say about the world they're living in, and inequity between the rich and the poor, and mass incarceration, and so many different things that are very clearly out of sync right now with where God would like for our world to be.
And black and white and brown, all people, when he said, I can't breathe, it was as though people took up that and said, I know, I can't either, we're dying too. Just like that cop had his knee on the neck of George, all these policy needs are on top of us. So in a season of death, we on top of that see the system clearly murder someone, and it's too much. But the protests, I believe, are bigger than just about George. The energy and the power and the ethic of those protests are saying, wait a minute, we're not ready yet to give up on this democracy. That's what you see in the street. It's the democracy trying to breathe and refusing to allow the policies of injustice to crush and suffocate our reality. And if you just fix what happens in Minneapolis, you just arrest these people and charge them, then that's all we need to do. When in fact, even George's life is the antithesis of that. He was an essential worker, he needed money, he needed health care. So we have to be careful in this moment that we do not see all of this energy and just say, once to get arrest in Minnesota and maybe conviction, then that's fine. We have to see this moment as a time for fundamental shifting. We must not just deal with who did this, but what. What made that cop think he could do that to George is still a part and parcel of our society, where too many people think they can use their power to crush people, right? Rather than lift people. So we must make sure this moment is not wasted. That's the way. It's just go back to being nice while injustice lives, going back to just too many people being comfortable with other people's death and desperation. It's not what we need. We need transformation. I believe we will not be the same after this pandemic and after this season of mass nonviolent protest. We cannot be the same. If we are, God help us. But I believe, and these folk in the street tell me, and this movement I'm a part of tells me, that it's not over for the possibilities in America, but we gotta fight for it.
There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. So break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. break every chain.
So we can't just understand God from one perspective for the last 2,000 years, where it was from white male theologians. We need all these other voices, the Latin American, Asian American, African American, womanist, Latinx voices, gay and lesbian voices, all these different voices to help us to understand who God is. And even with all the voices at the table, we will never be able to understand who God is. But at least we try. Different people have different experiences and different voices that they can help, and different ideas that contribute and give a deeper understanding of who God is, which is so needed. We don't want to go and have this narrow perspective, because that's not who God is. And the more voices that we welcome and we listen to and that we engage in dialogue, the better off we are to understand God, and better off we are as human beings.
That God has put some unique perspectives, worldview values about how the world works, without which the Western Church's understanding of faith in Jesus and the Bible will always be lacking. It will always be incomplete. I think it will be insufficient to carry us into this next movement of the Spirit if we don't allow voices from the margins to begin to inform those in positions of power and influence. And I find that many people who are Christ followers operate at a fundamental perception level about what the Bible teaches. But if it only comes out of our own cultural, sort of dominant culture worldview, we could very easily be mistaken and thinking that God looks and acts like us, when really He doesn't. And He could look and act just like somebody else.
And I think that dominant voices could learn leadership looks very differently. And they could learn how to make mistakes and ask for forgiveness and build something that I think is build something that's stronger because it is more diverse. I still think we're very busy building Christian empires, and we keep seeing them crumble, and it'll be interesting to see what's being built in these next few generations and iterations, as hopefully people have become more aware that there are marginalized voices that have been doing their own thing and creating their own things, because we're tired. We're not even waiting to be invited to those tables. We're creating our own spaces.
Sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Oh, I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see.
right. We are going to jump right in today because I have what I believe are some very interesting things to say. There's this thing in me that I think really, really needs to come out. So no more memes. For those of you who are disappointed in the lack of laughter at the beginning of the memes, very quickly, I do have one joke for you though to kind of get in to help that. Here's the joke. It's like a two-liner. What's the difference between a good joke and a bad joke timing? Oh, some of you will get that. Some of you need to rewatch that again and get how clever that truly was. But what we're going to talk about today is the Bible and power. So let's jump right into that. Here's where I will begin. The Bible was written by people from a Jewish minority living under the oppression of a succession of military superpowers. The Egyptians, you see in Exodus, the Persians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Greeks in between the Old and the New Testament, and by the time we get to Jesus, his people and him are still living under the boot of the Roman Empire. So there's this whole history of this Jewish minority living on the underside of military and political power, longing to be free. So by the time we get to Jesus, the Jewish people have been oppressed and living under oppression for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they are tired and they are exhausted and they are crying out to God and they long to be free. See, the people were tired of having other people in power define the shape of their existence. So the Bible, think about this. The Bible is a series of books written from the perspective of a minority group of people who are on the underside and the bottom end of power. Which raises an interesting question. Can you see how it's possible for American citizens to miss some of the central themes of this book? Think about that for a second. Can you imagine how citizens of the largest global military superpower the world has ever seen, meaning Americans, can miss some of the central themes of a library of books written by people who were living under the rule and under domination of military superpowers during their time? Do you see how it's possible for those who are used to privilege and power to miss some of the central themes, longings, and desires of a book written by people who are living on the bottom side of power? So I would begin with this. It's hard to hear the cries for liberation when you've never felt the need to be liberated. It's hard to connect with the cries for social liberation when you've personally never felt the need for liberation. Now, that's not true for everybody in America, but for a strong, dominant majority historically, that is a very true thing. Now, let's look at one of these amazing parables of Jesus called the Parable of the Talents. I'm assuming many of you, almost all of you who have been in church long enough have heard this parable told, and I've heard this kind of a sermon preached, but I want to give you a little twist today. So let's read the parable right now. It's Matthew 25:14 through 30. So beginning at the beginning. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness, right? Well done. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you've entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Well done so far. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I know that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the banker so that when I returned, at least I would get it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him, give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Interesting story. Now, a conventional reading of this, if you've listened to sermons in the United States of America, the master is the God character, right? The master is God. The heroes of the story are the ones who double the money and give some more back to God. And the cautionary warning, the person you don't want to be like, is the one who hid his money in the field. Why is that? Well, God gives each one of us talents. Usually we translate that into like abilities or giftings or whatever. So God gives you things to give to the world to make more of. If you use your gifts and give it back to God, he will keep multiplying that. But if you hide your gifts and you don't give it to the world, that's the problem. That's what you don't want to do, right? We've all heard a version of that. There's a lot of great wisdom there. But there's another way of reading this story. And there's different authors who would do this, different readings of this you'll get from Latin America. But in Colombia, there was this moment where this priest was exploring this text with a group of people. Now, the people who lived in this area of Colombia, they were farmers, they were into agriculture, they were peasants, they were people who were living on the bottom side of corrupt and oppressive political structures. So the people this Colombian priest was working with and teaching this to, their lives were actually a lot more like the lives of the Israelites under the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus than the lives of, say, a middle-class American citizen today. And when they explored this story and they were trying to gain meaning from it, they came up with a very different way of seeing this. So in this story, the master for these peasants who were reading this story wasn't the God character. The master in this story was an unjust and corrupt political leader who represented a corrupt and oppressive economic system. Because think about it, the story said the master, reaps what he does not sow. He takes from seed he didn't scatter. So they're already like, these are code words for another corrupt political leader in power who's manipulating and taking advantage of people just like they experience on a daily basis. And so when you start there, the people then go on to say, the cautionary tale, the people you don't want to be like in this story are the ones who are doubling the money for the master. They're like, those people aren't the ones you want to be like. The people doubling money for the corrupt master are actually those who are complicit in a corrupt economic system. Those are the people who lack integrity, who lack the integrity of a follower of Jesus to stand up and resist this corrupt regime, and instead they capitulate and they give in and they compromise their integrity of who they are, and they join in with this system that's manipulating and oppressing their very people. And in this same reading, they say then the hero of this story is the one who went and hid his money in the field. Why? Because he's the one who refused to compromise. He's the one who refused to go along with the system. He's the one who had the ability to resist and rebel against this corrupt regime that was oppressing him and his people. He was the one who risked his life knowing the master was corrupt for the sake of the kingdom of God, for following Jesus and for holding on to his own integrity. And what happened to the hero in the story? He was taken outside and killed by that corrupt system with that unjust leader in place. Come on. Now let's think about this. Do you see how the place that you occupy in a system of power can shape how you read the Bible, can shape how you think about power, and can shape how you connect with a story? Let's go back to this. The Bible was written by people whose situation was a lot more like those peasants and farmers in Colombia than it was middle class to upper middle class to the wealthy people here in the United States of America. Their situation was a lot more like the Israelites during that time. It's easy to miss the heart of people who are being oppressed and what they're saying as they're being oppressed by a military superpower when you grow up as a citizen of a military superpower. It's easy to miss the desires and the longings and the feelings and the emotions and the experiences of people who grow up on the bottom side of power when you're used to being in power and you're used to benefiting from a system of power. Right? This opening part is, can you see how where you're located in systems of power shapes how you read the Bible and shapes how you think about social events and stories that are taking place? And here's what I think this story and what so much of the Bible shows us. The Bible calls us to hear the cries of freedom wherever we are. The Bible calls us to hear the cries of freedom wherever we are, but it also shows us when you're in positions of power and you're comfortable, it can be really hard to hear those cries. Now, let's move on to this next section because I am excited. What I want to show you is, there's a straight line through from Exodus to Revelation 21, the image of the new creation, that reveals God's heart for justice and where he aligns himself with power. Then I want to show you how there's a straight line through a strong majority of the American church aligning themselves with power and oftentimes being on the other side of oppression. I'll make this clear. Exodus 3:7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because they're slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So we see in the Exodus story, the defining moment for the Israelites is this liberation. And what we need to know is this wasn't just a spiritual liberation they were seeking. These were slaves who were breaking their backs, laying brick after brick to build an empire that was not theirs. When they cried out for liberation, it was social, it was political, and it was economic, and they were crying out for God to liberate them from those conditions. Isaiah 1:17, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. They've been liberated. The God of justice liberates them from slavery. When the Israelites lose their way and they start becoming corrupt, the prophets continue to hold accountable the leadership of Israel, calling them back to the same God of justice who liberated them and calling them to be a force for justice where they are. Jump ahead to the life of Jesus. The first sermon he ever preaches in Luke 4:18 through 19. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. When Jesus stands up, and this is his first sermon, he is aligning himself with this tradition of liberation, with this God who aligns himself with those on the underside of power. And when he talks about freedom and recovery of sight and captives, he's not just talking about spiritual captivity. He's talking about every form of captivity: heart, spiritual, social, economic, political, everything that impinges upon our freedom. This God of justice wants to liberate and help lead us beyond. Jump ahead to Revelation 21:4. It's this poetic and prophetic vision of what this future is going to look like in the new creation. And the writer says, he, God, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. That old order of of injustice, that old order of corruption, that old order of everybody not having enough, that old order where things weren't working for everybody, that's all going to pass away. In the future is where it's healing and wholeness, and there's no more mourning, and every tear is going to be wiped, and all things are going to be made right. There is this straight line through from Exodus to Revelation that reveals that God is on the side of the oppressed, that God is calling his people to enact justice, and that God aligns himself with those on the underside of power, fights for them, and desires to liberate them so they can live into the fullness of their life in Christ, their life in this world as well. And in the same way, there's a straight line through showing that the God of justice aligns himself with those on the underside of power. I would argue there's a straight line through American church history that shows how the majority, or a strong majority of the church, consistently aligns herself with those in power over against those who are under power. So quick little survey. Slavery. Christians are silent or supporting it and defending it biblically, and oftentimes are slave owners. Not a good look for Christians there. Post Civil War, let's look at a history of lynchings in America. Over 5,000 people have been lynched and hung and murdered in the United States of America, the majority of those being black people. Christians are silent in the face of lynching, complicit in it, actively involved in it, or probably still defending it biblically somehow, aligning themselves with power over against those who are on the bottom of that system of power. All the Great Awakening preachers that so many pastors still revere today: Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, I could think of a lot more if I take the time. All these great revivalist preachers who define so much of American evangelical Christianity today. Slave owners defended and justified slavery, or were silent and said nothing about it. Which is why I tell people those aren't the people I look to from the past who are going to help lead us to a different future. Civil rights movement. The majority of a lot of the church not supportive of it, antagonistic towards it, suspicious of it, not big fans of MLK, see him as dangerous, see him as a criminal, see him as an insurrectionist, kind of the same way the Roman Empire saw Jesus. And even Billy Graham, one of the most revered preachers of all time in the Christian tradition, I don't think truly was an ally of the civil rights movement. He did not march. He did not publicly align himself with MLK and the movement. He said some little comments to the side. He said some negative things. But really was not a person who took a stance and I believe still chose to align himself with power publicly, and did not publicly align himself with the black community on the underside of power at that time. Look at some statistics from 2016 of the percentage of evangelical Christians that supported the message of Black Lives Matter. I want to say it was like 23% at that moment. I for some reason the number just glitched in my mind, but it was a very low number who didn't, not even the organization Black Lives Matter, but the message. So many Christians didn't even support the message of Black Lives Matter. That wasn't that long ago. So think about this. The story of the Bible is seeing how God supports, empowers, and aligns himself with those on the underside of power. And yet the story of so much of American Christianity is seeing how the church supports, empowers, and aligns herself with those in power over against those on the underside. Which is why I would say this. Too often, Christians allow the flag to shape their view of power more than the Bible. The Bible keeps inviting us and reminding us and calling us into the heart of the God who aligns himself with those who are being oppressed, those who are on the underside of power, and to join him in that fight and in that movement for freedom and for liberation. We are at this really cool stage in the relationship that Michaela and I have. You know, she's 3.5. It's like the world's so magical right now. And one of my favorite things is to introduce her into all these small things that I know are really the big things. Like just teaching her what frozen bananas were was like the coolest thing. You know, I'm like, you cut it in half. We're doing it together. You put a popsicle stick in it. I'm like, then you dip it in chocolate. I'm like, you could put sprinkles on it. She's like, what? Like, you could put coconut on it. What? Like, you could put marshmallows on it. What? Marshmallows? Daddy, that's so Tool. That's so Tool, Daddy. I say, you're right, Michaela, it is Tool. And she's like, Daddy, you said Tool wrong. You said Tool. It's actually Tool. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're right. I did say it's Tool. I'm sorry. And then recently, I started teaching her what s'mores were. Well, actually, since I taught her about frozen bananas, we made them, and now Christine wants to make them every night because she likes them so much. But I started teaching her what s'mores were. I'm like, you put a marshmallow on the edge of a stick. She said, what? Like, you put it over a fire and you roast it till it's like golden brown and like gooey on the inside. And she's like, oh my gosh, Daddy. I said, yeah, then you put it on a grill. I teach her the whole thing. And she's just so excited about it. And I came out recently and she was watching a cartoon where they were making s'mores. She was like, Daddy, look, they're making s'mores too, just like we're going to soon. Like so excited as a dad to introduce my daughter to the world of s'mores. But there's another story of a father who was wanting to introduce his kids and his family to s'mores too. His name was John Crawford III. And I think it was, I forget the date, I think it was August 5th, 2014. I might be wrong on that. But this young 22-year-old father, a black man, goes to the Walmart in Beaver Creek, Ohio. And he's going out to get s'mores ingredients for his kids. And while he's there, he's also looking at and perhaps is going to buy like an airsoft rifle. It's like a BB gun. So as he's walking through the store, just on the phone, talking to, I think, his mom on the phone at the time, he's holding the BB gun that he's going to buy. And then a woman in the Walmart makes a call to the police saying there's a man in here who has an assault rifle and he's pointing it at children. And he's doing this. And it looks like he's going to go out violently. And so she makes this call. The police arrive on the scene while this young man's back is turned, yell at him, don't even give him a chance to answer and to explain that what he's holding on to is a toy. And before he even has a chance to explain, they shoot him multiple times and he dies in that Walmart while he's on the phone with his mom, and she heard his last words, and then she heard him screaming. Years later, when they got to look at the tapes of it, what they realized was the timeline of the conversation that woman was having with the police and what John Crawford was doing didn't line up at all. He wasn't pointing the gun at kids. He wasn't acting erratically. He didn't look like he was going to go out violently. She made all of these things up. Her story was such a fabrication, did not reflect the reality of the situation. But then the cops responding to what she's doing out of the culture that they carry within them came in and murdered this innocent young man holding onto a toy that they sold in the store. And the thing is, most of us don't even know about that. Most of us never even heard that name. Most of us aren't even familiar with that story, because there was another murder of a black man soon after. I think it was Eric Garner, the first person that came, that sort of you could hear saying, "I can't breathe." I think it was that story. But there was one major murder after that basically buried this, where it became invisible and almost barely remembered. And to this day, those police officers have not been charged with anything, and they're still working. To this day, even though you can see the stories not aligned, there's been no repercussions for the woman who's been on that phone, who was on the phone, who made that call. And I just reheard this story last night as I watched this new Dave Chappelle special that came out on YouTube where he was retelling it. And it hit me so hard because I've been thinking about going out to buy stuff to make s'mores, for my family and for my kids for the first time. And I know my daughter will never have to worry about when Dad goes to a local store to buy groceries whether or not I'm going to come back alive. And yet this young man, this young father, this son goes out because he's excited just to buy s'mores for his family. And he doesn't even make it back. It's the last time any of them ever saw him. And I've just been sitting with that so much, and it just hit me so hard last night as I was reflecting on it. When Christians hear this story, is there a natural reflex to start asking questions about what he was doing and why he was there and why he was holding the gun? Is the first reflex to side with those in power and to question those who are being crushed by those in power? Or is our natural reflex to question those who are in power, to question the people doing the murdering, to question the woman who's making the phone call because of the history we have of people lying on the phone about what black people are doing? Is our reflex to question what the victims are doing? Because if so, that is the exact opposite reflex of what we see in the scriptures, of the God who aligns himself with those who are on the underside of power as he fights for their liberation. Why is our reflex for situations like this so often the exact opposite of what we see from the Spirit of God in the scriptures? Why is it so easy for self-proclaiming Christians to align ourselves with those in power whenever we see these kinds of dynamics at work? If every time another black person is killed, if every time another conversation about immigration comes up, if every time you hear Native Hawaiians talking about how their land was stolen, if every time protests or marches happen and our immediate impulse is disgust, antagonistic, or against those who are on the bottom side of power, and our immediate response is trying to justify the actions of those who are in power, we have our story wrong. We have the story of who we are wrong. The God of justice in the scriptures aligns himself with those who are under power, but so often our natural reflex is to align ourselves with those in power. And so as I say all that, if we want to be close to the God of justice, we have to be close to those struggling for justice. If you want to hear the same cries of those crying out for liberation that God did. You have to open your ears and be close enough to actually hear the people calling out. And this isn't about being political. It's about power, it's about people, and it's about being tired of living in a place that has such a strong majority that don't care about Black people, that don't care about Indigenous people, that don't care about Native Hawaiians, that don't care about First Nations people, that don't care about all of the people who have been marginalized and silenced, all of the very people whose position looks like the very place that Jesus and his people's position look like as we look at the Bible. I'm so tired of living in a world that, in a culture and in a country that keeps embodying that same spirit of what is this natural part of us wants to align with power and forget those who don't have it and who are on the underside. So what am I saying? I don't know, I'm inviting some of you to care. I'm inviting some of you to see differently. I'm inviting some of you to open your heart. I'm inviting some of you to listen. I'm inviting some of you to keep fighting. I'm inviting some of you to keep staying in tune. I'm inviting some of you to rethink your view of power for the first time, to rethink how the Bible invites us to relate to power in a new way. I think the invitation's different for everybody, but there's a fresh invitation from the scriptures to reshape who we are, how we relate to power, how we think about liberation, and to go deeper into the heart of the God of justice.
There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. So break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. There is power in the name of Jesus. To break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. There's an army rising up. There's an army rising up. There's an army rising up to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain, to break every chain, break every chain, break every chain. I hear the chains falling. 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 Break every chain, break every chain. So break every chain, break every chain, break every chain.
Imagine Church, would you continue to open yourself up in the silence and in the stillness, and as you listen, and would you continue to be bold and brave and sensitive and gracious as you move and as you speak. And so with that said,
well, now it's our honor to be able to read the benediction together for the first time in a while.
Together.
Where the kids are like pretty much down and we're both up and not working at the same time.
And not at night. So would you receive this, Imagine Church? May the Lord bless you and keep you.
May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you.
And may the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. And the community of Imagine says,
Amen.
We love you, and
guys.
we miss you, and we look forward to the day where we get to reunite in person again.